Hey gang, as I'm sure you can tell by the thumbnail, today we'll be talking about currencies. Now, I'm not an economist or some Forbes sellout, so we won't go into the absolute cluster as the Federal Reserve or stock market. We're all about the exotic adventures and forgotten and foreign lands here. But we may as well get our usual rundown so we know exactly what a currency is. A currency in the most specific sense is money in any form when in use or circulation as a medium of exchange, especially circulating banknotes and coins. A more general definition is that a currency is a system of money or monetary units in common use, especially for people in a nation. Under this definition, US dollars, euros, Indian rupee, Japanese yen, and pound sterling are examples of currencies. Currencies may act as stores of value and be traded between nations in foreign exchange markets, which determine the relative values of the different currencies. Currencies in this sense are defined by governments, and each type has limited boundaries of acceptance. So despite the way a lot of people perceive it, trading of currency is technically a form of bartering. It's just done so using a universally agreed upon middleman. The invention of money was a pretty important development for mankind, as it allowed far greater flexibility for trades of goods and services. Like, why would I trade my cow for 4 goats? Dude, I'm selling my cow to get out of the ranching biz and into fishing. What the hell would I want with goats? But what if I told you that you could trade that cow for some cowrie shells, and then use those to trade with the retiring fisherman for his boat? The true value of currency has never been in its monetary value. It's been in its ability to convert something that isn't valuable to some people into something that is. This is referred to as a medium of exchange. So how did we decide what would be money and what wouldn't? Well, it has to be something that has a relative scarcity. You couldn't just trade rocks or pebbles, because then the price of everything would be inflated. Because you'd be trading thousands of pebbles, because they're literally laying everywhere. I'm looking at you, Federal Reserve. But it also can't be something that's so rare that it can't even be circulated, or only 1 or 2 people would have it to trade. It can't even be something that's super easy to create, or you get the same problem you would have had with trading the rocks again. And lastly, it has to be something that lasts a good while. This one's actually super important, so we'll get to that later. For all of these reasons, one of the first forms of money we ever decided upon were cowrie shells. Or more specifically, monetaria moneta. Sounds a lot like monetary now, doesn't it? A specific species of sea snail. These were a great choice around Africa, Asia, and the Pacific Islands. Think about it. They all fit these criteria pretty well. They aren't just laying around all over the place, but they aren't totally impossible to find either. Their intricate shape makes them very difficult to counterfeit, and, well, they're pretty durable. You can even thread them onto jewelry like beads, making them easy to carry with you. These were such an effective currency that they were standard in some regions of the world all the way up into the 19th century. In Northern America, many Indian tribes began making their own shell currency. The wampumpieg beads of the Shinnecock are a great example. Made from channeled whelk shells, the name literally means white string of shell beads. But unlike money, they had a slightly spiritual side as well. Before encounter with the European colonists, they were also used for storytelling, ceremonies, gifts, record keeping, and decorating Hiawatha belts. The natives didn't actually consider them money quite in the same way that the Europeans did, but were welcome to trade with them anyway. Ultimately, these beads became obsolete due to the replication issue I mentioned earlier. With industrial technology and production methods, the colonists were able to produce them on an industrial scale, driving up the inflation and effectively making them worthless as a currency. Seeds and nuts were a pretty common early currency as well. In East Asia like Japan and China, rice or cloth was the standard for a really long time. The problem with this one was that neither had a great amount of longevity. Both were often eaten by insects or rodents, and wear and tear caused them to lose value. A rat eating your paycheck isn't the best excuse for why your rent is late. In the 200s BC, Emperor Qin Shi Huang introduced the first copper coins, called ban liang, and Japan, who at the time saw China as the center of high culture, attempted to adopt the ban liang, and later the Wuzhou coinage created their own, called the Wado Kaichin, which introduced higher denominations of 10 called the Taihei Genpo, using silver, and gold Kaiki Shoho made with gold. These worked pretty great during the Nara period. Unfortunately, they became debased to the point of worthlessness during the Heian Jidai, and they eventually went back to rice and cloth again. And if you don't know what debasement means, it's basically something that's cringe, kind of like this channel when... Debasement is just what happens when the precious metals and coins become a lower and lower percentage in relation to common metals. In other words, a gold coin is a mixture of gold and common metals like zinc and nickel is debased, while a coin that is made of pure gold is fully based. China experimented with all sorts of coin shapes during the Zhou dynasty, one of my favorites being the knife money. I like to imagine these led to some pretty hilarious muggings. Another popular one was the spade coin. Kind of an odd shape in my opinion. It doesn't even really resemble what few shovels I could find pictures of from that period. These two were made of bronze and other copper and tin alloys, and you can still find them today without too much difficulty. I keep a few of these myself along with a few other currencies I've collected over the years. There are actually a few pretty cool stories about where these originated actually. The most common being that a prince on campaign could no longer afford to pay his soldiers, and permitted them to trade with villagers using these knives or shovels. This kind of bartering became so popular that they later just ended up designing the coins after them. During the Edo period, the Tokugawa shogunate introduced some of their first paper scripts, called hansatsu, inscribed with copper, silver, and gold, thought to be inspired by the Yamada Hagaki the Shinto priest developed around 1600. Around the same time, they also developed an oval-shaped coin called the koban. This one was modeled after an earlier version called the ryo, which was minted earlier in the Kamakura period of the late 11th century. Strangely, the ryo actually outlived its own predecessor because the koban began to debase, as they used diminishing amounts of gold, making it easier and easier to counterfeit as time went on. And these lasted all the way up to the introduction of paper money during the Meiji Restoration of the mid-18th century. And if you're wondering about the koku you've probably heard of, get rid of it. It's a unit of volume, roughly the size of a small barrel. You just hear about it a lot because using it to measure rice as a currency was so common for such a long period of time. This one I was unfortunately never able to find for my personal collection. Africa had once used these in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in the 19th and 20th centuries. This was called the Katanga Cross, or the Honda. The name comes from a mining region rich in copper, which is what they're made out of. You can almost call it more of an ingot really than a coin, but these were pretty great for the local region because they could be made by simply melting down raw copper and pouring them into a mold. Likewise, the crosses could just as easily be melted down to create other things of use. At the time I'm creating this video, they were worth somewhere in the neighborhood of about $80. They had also had another pretty hilarious form of currency, but I'm going to loop that one in just a little bit later. The Solomon Isles even made something called rang, which was a moistened turmeric spice wrapped into a ball using coconut fibers. Spice was a pretty valuable commodity the world over because they could often preserve food and help make it edible, even if it wasn't. In fact, up to the 19th century, literal wars and conquests had been waged over it for a long time. Nutmeg in the Kingdom of Java is another good example of this. But there was another good reason the Solomon Isles went for this, because it was a hell of a lot better than what they had earlier, which was something called the Rye Stone. These 12-foot diameter, 8-ton coins are found almost exclusively on the island of Yap, but strangely can't actually be made there. Rye stones were made from limestone, of which the nearest source is the Isle of Palau. So limestone wasn't even that valuable. The value was in the effort it took to get the stone back to the isle for carving. So its true value was almost more of a symbol of prestige, kind of like that ugly as Louis Vuitton pattern. Seriously, the next time you hit the strip club, don't make it rain, give him a meteor shower. Hilariously, these behemoth coins are actually comparable to modern currency today. Why? Because you didn't actually carry all that with you. Its ownership was simply traded in public ceremony, much in the same way that bits of data in your bank account are traded on ownership. Think of it like swiping your debit card instead of dancing around the register and violently shouting that you're giving all your money to the checkout guy. Speaking of Palau, they got a little extreme with the whole "In God We Trust" bit back in 2007 by issuing a silver dollar that had the image of the Virgin Mary inscribed, along with a tiny vial of holy water from the grotto at Lourdes in France. They even issued coins with tiny meteorites and mother of pearl in them. For some reason, the Cook Islands took that personally and decided to one-up them with a coin they put a whole-ass TV screen in. It was made to commemorate the famous inventor, John Logie Baird, for 80 years of television. I love the Pacific, man. Y'all are wild out there. A number of complex cultures in the Mediterranean made for all sorts of coins, but some a little more interesting than others, which I'll get to in due course. Another of the oldest forms of money was salt. Yeah, like table salt. As something that could preserve food for long spans of time, it was something that was not super common, but still valuable. In fact, the Latin word for it was salarium, which is where you get the term salary. What, you were expecting more? Well, how about the phrase saldare, which means to give salt? Sound familiar? Yeah, it's because that's where the word soldier comes from, because it was a pretty common method of paying them back then. This use of salt wasn't limited to Rome either. It was pretty common in the Middle East as well, because you can guarantee its authenticity just by licking it. And you could break pieces off of it to make change, or smaller denominations. Salt wasn't the only one in Italy either. Because of its relative difficulty and time needed to produce, Parmigiano Reggiano cheese was also used as a currency and a bank collateral. And if that isn't the most violently Italian you ever heard, then get out of my face. In the islands of Greece, the Isle of Olbia had a concerningly unhealthy obsession with bottlenose dolphins, and minted their bronze coins accordingly. And while it's not entirely related to value, the Romans were believed to have started something called a mast-stepping ceremony. This ancient naval tradition entails a coin being nailed to the mast of a new ship for good luck, a practice still carried out by most Western navies to this day. It's believed this was done as a sacrifice to the gods to ensure the vessel was successful, or serve as payment to Chiron in case they needed a lift across the river Styx if the first plan failed. Win-win! After World War I, Germany was struggling with rebuilding their royally jacked-up economy, and came up with a pretty unusual, if not clever solution, which I call making up. Local communities would take whatever random-ass objects they could find and printed Notgeld, or emergency money, on whatever wasn't bolted to the floor, including wooden blocks, aluminum foil, cloth napkins, and even playing cards until the Reichsbanks got their act together. Once this weird economy stabilized, the banks began to slowly destroy this monopoly money and replace it with the new currency to take its place. Now, this seems clever, but remember that second bizarre currency from the Republic of Congo I mentioned earlier? When the totalitarian president Mobutu Sese Seko of the then Republic of Zaire was dethroned and exiled, the new government didn't have a new cash on hand to replace the old yet. The solution? Just cut the dude's face out of the bills. Easy day. Look at me. I am the president now. Now, there's no way I'm going to get to cover this topic without someone wanting to talk about pirate money, despite it being essentially just, well, everyone else's money. You hear about doubloons a lot, but those elaborate North American actors known as Canadians might be a bit familiar with its concept, because it's essentially just a toonie. The standard $2 coin of the Spanish during the Age of Sail was called the escudo, and the doubled version of it was called the double escudo, or doubloon, sometimes called the pistole. This was super confusing because they even had larger denominations of 8 escudo called quadruple escudo. This escudo actually replaced another coin which should also sound familiar, the pieces of 8. Now, if you're like me and love British comedy, you've probably heard all the different denominations they use amongst all the modern Euro jargon, and they somehow managed to make it both simple and complicated at the same time. Quite an achievement. With 1 penny, 2 pence, 5 pence, 10 pence, 20 pence, 50 pence, and the pound and £2, they have even more pences, but at least had the decency to give them all the same name. They also used to have the testoon, later to be called the shilling, which was worth 12 pence. And you could even get a 10 bob note that was worth multiple shillings, because things weren't complicated enough yet. Because it was made from silver for a long time, it got its name from sterling, and its fluctuated value was all over the place. And by the late 19th century, it was worth 5 pence. They eventually got rid of that stupid nonsense on February 15th of 1971 for obvious reasons in what was called Decimal Day, and was finally removed from circulation in 1990. I actually want to go off script for a moment just to point out how incredibly badass their new minting design is. Drifting back over to the Americas, the Mesoamerican cultures like the Olmec, Mayans, and later the Aztecs popularized the use of cocoa beans over their other local bartering practices, such as tobacco, maize, and cloth. But if you thought you'd end up literally eating your paycheck, I kinda doubt it, because these beans were made into a horribly bitter and spicy drink that was limited to the noble class due to its relative scarcity. It was considered a food of the gods, a sacred tree created for mankind by the feathered serpent deity Quetzalcoatl, making it almost a ritualistic drink that was used during military campaigns to stimulate the soldiers and give them an edge in battle, kind of like the crackheads behind the gas station. In fact, even the Mayan name Caucau eventually had the Aztec suffix atl added to it, becoming Caucauatl, better known as chocolate. And if you think this currency is gone and is no longer in circulation, ask any soldier, airman, marine, or sailor what goods are best for trading while on deployment. Whew, that was a lot to cover for a brand new video format. Huge shout out to Renko who helped me bring this avatar to life, and I've even linked their channel in my description as thanks. So go check them out, they're clearly a lot more talented at this than me. Anyway, I hope you guys liked this new video. It was a long wait, but I think it was all worth it in the end. If you enjoy this kind of content, do the usual like and subscribe. Seriously, you have no idea how much this helps out a tiny channel like this. Feel free to drop any cool exotic topics you'd like me to cover in the comments, and maybe I'll make a video on them. But until that time, Donadago Havi, or until we meet again.